Welcome to A View to a Grill. I'm Johnny, and today we're going to be smoking some ribs on the Weber kettle using a slow and sear, and we're going to try some new seasoning today. We're going to try chicken fried barbecue Texas rib grind. First, let's prep the ribs. We're going to start off with taking the ribs out of the package. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the membranes from both racks of ribs. Sometimes it takes one pull and sometimes it takes two. Now that we've gotten our membranes off, we're going to season our ribs. Today we're using a rub made right here in Texas called Chicken Fried Barbecue's Texas Rib Grind. I tasted this rub right out of the bottle and I can tell it had a lot of sweetness to it and some back-end heat from that black pepper. Whenever using a new rub, I like to make sure that it's nice and loose inside of the container first. So I'll always use a fork just to kind of loosen it up first, just so that I can ensure that I get a nice even pour out of the bottle. I'll start seasoning these on the bone side. We'll get both sides seasoned and then turned over meat side up on a wire baking grid. I'll get these in a shallow pan and then season the meat side. Now the reason for the shallow pan is just to make cleanup easier. Now at least on the meat side, once you're done with your first pass of seasoning, then you want to go back over and kind of touch it up and get any spots you might have missed. I like to keep the seasoning as even as possible and kind of see-through so that you can still see the meat on the ribs. Now that we have these seasoned, we'll get these in the refrigerator as we set up our pit. For our setup today, I am using the slow and sear, and today I'm going to be using 3 chunks of oak. And once I have the oak in there, I'm going to top it off with some B&B lump charcoal. Now at the top of the slow and sear, I've left a little bit of space for my lit charcoal. I'll be using a drip pan for easy cleanup. And today I'm also going to be using my Craycourt cast iron grill grates. Now I'll get my chimney starter started with just a few chunks of charcoal on one side. When I see that the charcoal is just about ready to go, I'll get some hot water into the water reservoir of the slow and sear. And now the charcoal is ready, we'll get that into that empty spot that I left in the slow and sear. I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on today because my lawn guys are here and I don't want any grass or dust to get inside the pit while I go get the ribs. Now here are the ribs. As you can see, the seasoning has set up nicely and they actually got a little bit darker while they were sitting in the refrigerator. Let's get the ribs on and start setting up our thermometer. I'm only going to be monitoring the ambient temperature today because I don't normally monitor the temperature of my ribs. I look for other signs on the ribs to tell me when it gets close to wrapping and when they're done, and we'll talk about that later. For this cook, I'm going to be shooting for an ambient temperature of about 275 degrees, give or take 10 degrees. We are doing a great job at maintaining our temperature today. We're at 273 degrees. It's been about 2 hours, so we're going to take our first look at the ribs. The ribs are looking really good. They're developing a nice color. The bark is developing nicely. The ribs are starting to develop a nice little bend to them. The surface of the ribs are cracking a little bit. And this is telling me that the ribs are cooking really well and kind of fast. What I'm going to do is spritz them, get the lid back on, and then start setting up to wrap the ribs. Since we are not using a temperature probe to probe the internal temperature of the ribs, one of the things I'll be using today is this metal skewer to probe for tenderness. We're going to be using paper today to wrap our ribs. Now I like this brand of paper because it's made right here in Texas and it's been FDA approved for food. Whenever I'm wrapping ribs, I like to start meat side down. Now the ribs are looking pretty good. They have a nice bend to them. If these ribs were overcooked, they would literally fall apart when you're holding them like this. So this tells me that at this point, they are not overcooked. We'll get the ribs down and spritz them one last time. Now let's get these ribs wrapped up. We're going to start by taking the paper that's closest to you and folding it up and over the ribs. Just reach over to the other side and fold them back towards you, and then get the right side and fold over. We're going to take the left side and fold it over. We'll get those back on the Weber kettle and do it all over again with the second rack of ribs. Now here I made a mistake. I meant to probe for tenderness before I actually wrapped the ribs, but I forgot. But no problem. All we have to do is find a soft spot between the bones and then poke a hole through the paper and probe for tenderness. Now, the reason why we're probing for tenderness now, even though I know these are not done, but it's going to tell me how much longer I have to go and how often to check. So at this point, I'm going to raise the temperature to 300 degrees and let them go for about 45 minutes, and then I'll check them again. And then 45 minutes later, we're at 300 degrees and it's time to probe for tenderness again. And these are really close, so I'm going to check them again in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, we are still hovering about the 300 degree mark, and I'm going to check these again. And now they are feeling tender, so I'm ready to take them off. We'll get these out of the Weber kettle and onto the cutting board. Now when we put these on the cutting board, we're going to put them the folded side down, and we're just going to let them rest right inside of the butcher's paper. I'm not going to cut the butcher's paper or anything. We're going to let them rest just like they are. Now if you want to cut the butcher's paper, you can do that if you want to. After about 30 minutes of rest, it is time to take these out of the butcher's paper to see what we got. We'll get both of these unwrapped and have a closer look. I think the color looks good. I think the ribs look good. Now let's cut some ribs and see what they look like on the inside. Now let's get in there and take a closer look at these ribs. Now I really like the color that these ribs turned out. It's like this dark reddish mahogany color, and I really think that that makes a pretty rib color, especially because these are a no sauce rib. So you don't have anything extra adding to the look or the texture of the ribs. Now let's see what they taste like. I'll just grab this rib right here, take a bite, and the flavor is really good. I am really digging the way these taste, Bill. And now I'm just going to try something off the top of my head. So I ran inside, got my spice grinder, and then I poured a little bit of this Texas rib grind into the spice grinder, because the reason is that this rub tastes so good that I think it might actually make a nice finishing dust. I'll put a little bit in the spice grinder, grind it up, and pour it on a plate. Now I'm just going to dip my rib into it and see what it tastes like. And yeah, it tasted good as a finishing dust, or in this case, a finishing dry dip. Now if you've made it this far, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching A View to a Grill, and I'll see you next time.